They say the past is never truly dead, it's just waiting for the right moment to wake up. Imagine bringing the love of your life home to meet your mother, only to watch the color drain from her face. Imagine discovering that the man you plan to marry isn't just a stranger, he is the victim of a crime your family has been hiding for 20 years. This isn't just a story about a broken engagement. It's a story about a life built on an unthinkable lie, a teacher who crossed every line, and a daughter caught in the crossfire of a history she never knew existed. Welcome to Signal 49, the place where we don't just retell cases. We take them apart, motive by motive, moment by moment, and ask the questions most people are afraid to ask. If you care about justice, if you care about vulnerable people being protected, if you care about how something like this can happen in the first place, make sure you're subscribed and on your notifications. This is the story of Teresa Reynolds. The beginning of a life built on an unthinkable lie. On a quiet Saturday evening in October 2019, the sun was setting over a modest neighborhood in Austin, Texas. The lawns were trimmed, the porch lights were just beginning to glow, and nothing about the street appeared extraordinary. No police tape, no media vans, no warning that history was about to rewrite itself. Yet inside one of these small houses, neat, quiet, predictable, sat a woman whose entire life was about to collapse. Teresa Reynolds, 47 years old, had kept a secret for over 2 decades. A secret she believed she had buried under new names, new jobs, and new versions of herself. She was wrong. Because on that warm evening her daughter, a woman she had raised alone, was walking up the driveway hand in hand with a man she planned to marry. The man who turned out to be the boy Teresa had once abused. The boy she had left town to escape. The boy who became her daughter's father. No one in that moment understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. This is how it all began. Jada, a child who grew up with half a life. A childhood of missing pieces. Jada Reynolds was born on August 12, 1998, in a cramped hospital room on the east side of Austin. Her mother, Teresa, held her for a moment, whispered something unintelligible through tears, and then turned her face away from the nurse's questions about the father. The birth certificate listed the father as unknown. The truth was far darker than anonymity. Growing up, Jada never questioned why she didn't know her father. She saw other kids whose fathers were absent, incarcerated, estranged, or simply uninterested. She understood, because children often accept what adults tell them, that families come in many forms. Hers was just one of them. Her mother worked constantly. Days as a medical receptionist. Nights cleaning offices. Jada learned early how to microwave frozen dinners, how to lock the door, and how to stay quiet when her mother returned exhausted and emotionally unavailable. Their bond existed, but only partially. Teresa provided food, shelter, clothes, and the basics required to raise a child. But affection? Closeness? Transparency? Those were things Jada learned only from observing other families. She noticed how mothers hugged their daughters after school plays. How fathers carried sleeping children to their cars after evening sports practices. How some households sounded loud and messy and full of emotion. Her own home was quiet. Controlled. Structured around her mother's need to avoid discussing anything personal. Especially the past. The questions that lead nowhere. Jada tried to ask her mother about her father once when she was 9 years old. It was during a class assignment, drawing a family tree. Jada's tree had one trunk, one branch, and a blank half at the top. "Mom," she asked gently that night at the dinner table, "what was Dad like?" Teresa didn't even look up from her plate. "He left," she said. "That's all you need to know." "Why did he leave?" "People leave," she answered flatly. "Eat your dinner." Jada never asked again. But the absence shaped her more than she realized. She became driven, ambitious, determined to create a future that wasn't defined by unanswered questions. She excelled in school. She pushed herself in writing, debate, and journalism, fields built on uncovering truths, even the uncomfortable ones. Ironically, the biggest truth in her own life remained hidden. And the person hiding it was the one she trusted most. Teresa, the woman who ran from her past. Before the crime, before the child. To understand how the present collapsed, we have to go back to the late 1990s, to a different version of the woman now known as Teresa Reynolds. Back then, she was Teresa Brennan, a bright, idealistic 26-year-old English teacher at Beaumont High School. She had moved to the refinery town seeking what she considered a fresh start after a difficult breakup and a life that felt directionless. She wanted to teach. She wanted to make a difference. She wanted validation in ways she would never admit aloud. And she found it in the worst place possible. The boy she should have protected. In the fall of 1997, a 15-year-old boy named Daniel Cooper sat quietly in the back row of her creative writing class. He was shy, withdrawn, and grieving the loss of his mother, who had died of an aneurysm earlier that year. Daniel wrote beautifully, soulfully, about loneliness, loss, and longing. His words were raw and vulnerable in a way few teenagers allowed themselves to be. To any responsible adult, these were signs to offer help, guidance, and support. To Teresa, they were signs of something else. She saw admiration. She saw dependence. She saw a way to fill her own voids. What began as extra tutoring sessions after school, closed door, lights low, just the two of them, slowly transformed into something no child should ever experience. By March of 1998, the boundary had been crossed. Over and over. Daniel didn't understand grooming. He didn't recognize manipulation. He didn't realize that what felt like attention was actually exploitation. He was 15. She was 26. Yet she convinced him it was love. The pregnancy that ended everything. When Teresa discovered she was pregnant in early May, she didn't panic outwardly, but inside, she knew she had detonated her own life. She didn't confide in the school. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't tell her family. Instead, she packed up her apartment, submitted a rushed resignation letter, and skipped town before anyone knew what had happened. She left the boy she abused alone, confused, and believing he had done something wrong. She disappeared from Beaumont like she had never existed. And few months later, she gave birth to a daughter. Jada. The child born from a crime she refused to acknowledge. She reinvented herself as Teresa Reynolds, built a new life in Austin, and hid the truth so deeply she convinced herself it would never surface again. She was wrong. The years of silence. Jada's path to independence. By the time Jada reached high school, she had matured into a driven, intelligent young woman with a voice that demanded to be heard. She joined the student newspaper, wrote about social issues, won speech competitions, and became known as someone who always asked the right questions. Her mother hated questions. Yet Jada learned to accept her mother's emotional distance. She believed this was simply who Teresa was, practical, tough, private. A woman shaped by hardship, not warmth. In 2016, when Jada received a partial scholarship to the University of Houston, her mother cried quietly in the kitchen. Jada mistook it for pride. In truth, Teresa feared that distance and time would eventually bring the truth to the surface. And she was right to be afraid. College, ambition, and the loneliness behind success. At university, Jada flourished academically. She studied investigative journalism, published articles on structural inequality, and gained recognition from her professors. But success didn't erase loneliness. She had only dated casually. Nothing felt real. She didn't have many family members to lean on. Her mother was distant even over the phone. And while her achievements filled her resume, they didn't fill the emotional emptiness she'd carried her whole life. Then, at a coffee shop near campus, she knocked over a stranger's drink. And everything changed.
Your support matters. Kindly subscribe to stay connected to The Signal.
A life rebuilt on fragile foundations. By 2019, Daniel Cooper had spent nearly 2 decades trying to outrun his past. He moved to Houston after high school, earned a degree in computer science, built a stable career, went to therapy, forced himself to believe that what happened in Beaumont was a confusing, shameful chapter he could seal away forever. He never told anyone. Not his father. Not his friends. Not anyone he dated. He believed silence was healing. He believed moving forward meant forgetting. But trauma buried alive is never dead. It simply waits for the right moment to rise. A chance encounter that felt like fate. The day he met Jada began like any other. A coffee shop, a laptop, a quiet afternoon alone. Then she knocked over his drink, apologized through laughter, and insisted on buying him a new one. They talked for hours, about injustice, books, music, and all the things two emotionally wounded people rarely admit to strangers. Daniel saw in her curiosity, passion, and brightness the kind of hope he'd long believed he was unworthy of. Jada saw in him everything she had craved but never received: gentleness, steadiness, and emotional presence. Their age difference didn't matter. Their wounds seemed to understand each other. Their connection felt immediate and safe. And for the first time in decades, Daniel allowed himself to hope again. 7 months of a love that was never supposed to exist. From March to September 2019, Jada and Daniel lived in a kind of emotional oxygen bubble. They learned each other's habits. They navigated long workdays and long study nights. They built a future in whispered conversations and late-night drives. Daniel loved her fiercely. Jada loved him completely. He proposed on her 21st birthday as the sunset painted the Houston skyline in gold. She didn't even let him finish the question. "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Yes, yes, yes." They made plans, chose dates, mapped a life. The only thing left was for Daniel to meet her mother. And that was the moment the past finally came knocking. The doorway where the past and present collided. A simple plan for a life-changing night. On October 19, 2019, Jada and Daniel drove from Houston to Austin for what should have been a simple family visit. They rehearsed the conversation in the car: who would speak first, how they'd tell her mother about the engagement, how they'd ask for her blessing. Jada believed her mother might be distant or overly cautious. But nervous? Unnerved? Terrified? She never imagined those possibilities. Daniel, for his part, was deeply anxious. He had never met any partner's parents before, and the idea of being judged or evaluated triggered a quiet dread in him, one that had roots he didn't yet understand. The house looked ordinary from the outside: small porch, wind chimes, potted plants, a faded welcome mat. Nothing about it warned that everything in his life was about to rupture. And yet, when Jada grabbed his hand and led him up the walkway, he felt a faint sense of unease. A sensation like stepping into a memory he didn't know he had. The door opens. A moment frozen in time. When Teresa opened the door, she expected to see her daughter. She did not expect to see him. The man standing next to Jada, the man holding her hand, the man she had just introduced as her fiancé, had the same face she had seen 2 decades earlier when he was only a boy. Older now, bearded, more confident, but undeniably the same. Daniel Cooper, her former student, her victim, her escape, her past. Her breath vanished. Her knees almost buckled. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. For 21 years she had prepared for many outcomes: curiosity, questions, suspicion, but she had never imagined this one. Her daughter's fiancé was the boy she had once abused. The boy who had fathered her child. Daniel, seeing the shock on her face, felt his stomach drop. His instinct screamed danger. Recognition. Something he had buried deep inside him began to stir with a force he couldn't contain. And then she spoke. Barely audible. Barely breathing. "Daniel." Jada blinked in confusion. "You've met before?" she asked. The silence that followed was unbearable. The first crack in everything. Daniel's mind begins to spiral. When Daniel heard Teresa say his name not sir, not young man, but his actual name spoken with familiarity, his body froze. There was something in her voice. Something he hadn't heard in 20 years. Something he'd tried to lock away. His brain scrambled for an explanation. Did she remember him from somewhere? Did he interview her for his job? Did they live in the same neighborhood? His eyes scanned her face. Her jawline. Her eyes. The way she held herself. Something about her seemed familiar in the way an old wound feels familiar. In the way a nightmare feels familiar even after years of silence. Then she said something that shattered the last protective barrier in his mind. Daniel. Cooper. His heartbeat hammered. Her tone wasn't casual recognition. It was horror. Shame. And a secret. A secret that connected them in ways he had never dared revisit. "No," he whispered under his breath. "No, this can't be." Jada watches the world tilt. Jada stepped forward, trying to break through the paralysis between them. "Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" But neither of them answered her. Teresa couldn't form words. Daniel couldn't breathe. Jada had never seen her mother lose composure like this. She had never seen her mother look haunted. For the first time in her life, she felt afraid of the answer she was about to hear. Recognition. "Miss Brennan." Daniel finally spoke. 2 words. Barely audible. Barely controlled. 2 words that sent Jada's blood cold. "Miss Brennan." The color drained from Teresa's face. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, gasping. Her chest tightened. Her vision blurred. Her mind screamed that this moment, this exact moment, was the one she had spent 2 decades running from. Jada stepped back, her heart pounding. "Mom, what did he just call you?" Teresa couldn't speak. She couldn't hide. She couldn't lie. All she could do was collapse into the truth. She had spent 21 years smothering under new identities and carefully controlled silence. Her past had arrived on her doorstep. And it was in love with her daughter. Chaos in the living room. Jada demands answers. Once inside, the tension escalated so quickly the air felt heavy and unbreathable. "Somebody talk," Jada said, her voice cracking. "Please." Neither of them did. Daniel paced, hands shaking uncontrollably, staring at the floor as his mind ricocheted between fragments of memory he had spent years suppressing. Teresa clutched her arms tightly to her chest, rocking slightly, unable to meet her daughter's eyes. "Mom," Jada whispered. "Why did he call you that name? Who is Miss Brennan?" The name hit Teresa like a punch. Her lips trembled. Her voice broke. I'm sorry, Jada." "Sorry for what? What's happening? Someone please tell me the truth." Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were filled with something Jada had never seen in him before. Fear. Recognition. Trauma. And betrayal. "You told me your mother's last name was Reynolds," he said, his voice strained. "It is," Jada insisted. "I mean, it has been my whole life, Mom." Teresa closed her eyes. "Reynolds is a name I took later." "What was your name before?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. Long, agonizing silence. Then she whispered it. "Brennan." The memory returns. Daniel faces a past he never asked for. The moment the name left her lips, Daniel felt like the room tilted. His ears rang. His chest constricted. His vision blurred around the edges. He saw flashes. Classroom lights. A closed door. A soft voice telling him he was special. Hands that shouldn't have touched him. A secret that felt like a warm trap he didn't understand. He saw himself at 15. confused, lonely, desperate for comfort after losing his mother. And he saw her, younger, smiling, saying things no teacher should say, doing things no adult should do. He sank into a chair, trembling. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, it's you." Jada stared at him, horrified. "What do you mean, Daniel? What's going on? What did she do?" Teresa sobbed into her hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jada stepped back from both of them. "Somebody tell me the truth." A mother's crime revealed. The confession begins. Jada's voice cracked open the moment of paralysis. Teresa lifted her head, eyes red, makeup smeared, breathing uneven. "Jada, please sit." "No," Jada snapped. "Tell me what's happening. Now." Daniel couldn't look at her. Teresa couldn't look away. "Jada," she whispered, "when I was younger, I made a terrible mistake. Not a mistake," Daniel interrupted, voice cold. "A crime." Jada froze. "A crime?" Teresa swallowed hard. "I was a teacher. And Daniel was my student." Jada felt the floor drop from under her. Daniel closed his eyes. And the truth finally stepped into the room, heavy and monstrous. "I was 15. Daniel's voice trembled. "I was 15, Jada." Jada stared at him, uncomprehending. 15? Her mind rejected it. No. Impossible. Her mother was not capable of. But the look in his eyes, the pain, the shame, the trembling, it was real. Too real. "Oh my God," Jada whispered. "Mom, tell me it's not true." Teresa shook her head slowly. "I can't." The terrifying realization. The words that destroyed her world. Jada felt sick. Her stomach churned. Her skin felt cold. Her legs felt hollow. She stared at her mother, then at Daniel, then back at her mother. "How long?" she whispered. "How long did this go on?" Teresa didn't answer immediately. Daniel did. "Months," he said softly. "More than that." It didn't stop until she left town and disappeared. Jada covered her mouth, horrified. "You disappeared," she whispered to her mom. "You left everything behind? Why?" Teresa began to cry harder. "I was young. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do when I found out." "When you found out what?" Jada demanded. Silence. Then Teresa whispered the words that shattered her daughter's entire existence. "When I found out I was pregnant." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Jada felt the blood drain from her face. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, no." The shattering. The truth Jada could not accept. Jada staggered backward until her legs hit the couch. She didn't sit. She collapsed. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her mother reached toward her. "Don't," Jada hissed. "Don't touch me." Daniel sat frozen, staring at the floor, unable to look at either of them. He felt everything he had built in his adult life crumbling as the truth clawed its way into the open. Jada's voice grew small and fragile. "Mom, who is my father?" Teresa's mouth opened to answer. But Daniel said it first. And when he spoke, it destroyed whatever innocence remained. "Me." Jada didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't faint. She simply went silent. Horribly, terrifyingly silent. Then she whispered, "You're my father. And my fiancé." Daniel shook his head desperately. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Jada, I didn't know. I would never." Jada interrupted with a cracked whisper, "But you almost married me." His face broke. "I didn't know." Teresa sobbed into her hands. Jada stared at them both with a look that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Impact. 3 lives in freefall. For nearly an hour, no one spoke. Daniel sat in the corner, hands in his hair, shaking violently. His trauma, buried beneath years of forced stability, had erupted in a tidal wave of memory, shame, and disbelief. Jada sat on the couch, rocking slightly, whispering to herself, "This can't be real. This can't be real." Teresa watched the 2 people she loved most suffer because of what she had done. She wanted to explain, to justify, to soften the truth. But there was no version of this story that erased the harm. The past had finally won. And the people who deserved peace were now drowning in pain. The escape. Daniel leaves first. Daniel couldn't stay. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't survive another second in that house. He stood abruptly. "I have to go." Jada barely reacted. Teresa reached for him. "Daniel." "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't ever say my name again." He stumbled out the door. He made it to the front yard before collapsing to his knees, dry heaving into the grass as old trauma tore through him like wildfire. He drove away with shaking hands, crying so hard he could barely see the road. Jada leaves next. 10 minutes later, Jada grabbed her bag and ran outside. "Jada, wait," her mother pleaded. Jada turned, eyes red and hollow. "Don't call me your daughter," she whispered. "You never deserved to have one." She left. Teresa is left alone. For the first time in 21 years, Teresa had no one to hide behind. No lies. No excuses. No distance to protect her. Just the truth. And the wreckage it had created. She sank onto the living room floor and screamed. Daniel's drive into darkness. Daniel drove without knowing where he was going. The highway blurred into streaks of yellow and white. Cars honked around him. His vision swam. His chest tightened so violently he thought he might pass out behind the wheel. He pulled over on the shoulder, slammed the brakes, and leaned forward with his forehead against the steering wheel, sobbing in a way he hadn't sobbed since he was a child. Not since he lost his mother. Not since the abuse. All the years he had spent burying his trauma under layers of adulthood, careers, therapy, stability, routines, were peeling away in seconds. The truth was too big. Too monstrous. Too impossible. He had fallen in love with his own daughter. He had proposed to her. He had imagined a future with her. Not out of malice. Not out of deviance. But because someone else had stolen his ability to understand what had been done to him. And now the consequences had landed in the most devastating way imaginable. He punched the steering wheel until his hand throbbed. Until his breath came in broken gulps. Then he whispered the question that would haunt him for years. Why didn't she tell me? He didn't mean Jada. He meant her. Miss Brennan. Teresa. The woman who had stolen his adolescence. The woman who had shaped his silence. The woman who had disappeared before he even understood the damage she'd done. Now she had taken something even greater from him. His chance at a normal life. Jada runs from the truth. Shock without tears. Jada didn't cry on the drive back to Houston. She didn't speak. Didn't scream. Didn't process. Her mind felt wrapped in cotton, muffled and numb, as if reality had slipped just slightly out of focus. Daniel was her father. Her fiancé. Her partner. Her blood. Her mother was a criminal. Her childhood was built on a lie. Her future had just been obliterated. She didn't remember parking her car. Didn't remember walking to her apartment. Didn't remember collapsing on her bedroom floor. At midnight, she finally spoke, to the empty room, to no one at all. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice cracked, not from sadness but from disbelief. Her mind tried to hold onto something rational. Something solid. Something that made sense. But nothing did. She had been in love. She had been planning a wedding. She had felt safe for the first time in her life. And now? She had no father. She had no fiancé. She had no identity. Just trauma she hadn't asked for. Her eyes burned. Her throat tightened. But still, no tears came. Just a cold emptiness that felt like the world's cruelest joke. The mother who finally broke. Teresa alone with everything she'd buried. Back in Austin, Teresa sat on the living room floor until the sun rose and painted the walls gold. She felt fragile, brittle, like one touch would shatter her completely. For 21 years she had convinced herself she was protecting her daughter by staying silent. But deep down, she had always known the truth. She was protecting herself. Protecting her job. Her freedom. Her ability to raise her child without authorities taking her away. Her ability to pretend she wasn't the monster she saw in the mirror every morning. She had justified her choices with phrases like, "It was a different time. I was young. He loved me too. It wasn't what people think. I gave Jada a good life." But none of those excuses worked anymore. Not after seeing Daniel's face. Not after watching Jada's world collapse. Not after her carefully hidden past had collided head-on with the life she built. She whispered into her hands, "I ruined everything." And for the first time, she meant it. Mandatory reporting. Daniel reaches out, and the system reacts. The next morning, Daniel drove to his therapist's office without an appointment. He didn't even wait for the receptionist. He walked into the lobby shaking violently and said, "I need help. Now." The therapist brought him into her office and, after hearing everything, made one of the most difficult decisions of her professional career. She was legally required to report sexual abuse of a minor by a teacher, with resulting pregnancy, with an adult survivor still impacted, with a child produced from the abuse. She filed the report immediately. Within hours, the case landed on the desk of Child Protective Investigators, Adult Survivor Support Networks, Law Enforcement, the school district where the abuse occurred, a special victims unit specializing in historical cases. The machine had awakened. What lay dormant for 20 years was now a legally active criminal case. Jada reaches out too. Jada didn't call a therapist. She called the campus counseling hotline at 3:14 a.m., her voice flat, mechanical. When she told the counselor what had happened, the line went silent. Then came the calm, rehearsed voice of someone who had heard trauma before. "Jada, what happened to you is not your fault." Jada didn't respond. "You didn't do anything wrong," the counselor continued. "You were misled your entire life. You need support. And because this involves abuse of a minor, I am obligated to report it." Within the hour, a second mandatory report was filed. 2 independent reports. 2 separate sources. One story that now had to be investigated. There was no going back. Law enforcement takes notice. The case lands on Detective Maria Alvarez's desk. Detective Alvarez had worked special victims cases for 14 years. She knew the patterns, the signs, the familiar ways trauma echoes through adulthood. When she read the initial report, she expected it to be complicated. She didn't expect it to involve a teacher, a minor victim, an illegal disappearance, a pregnancy, a second-generation victimization, a near-incestuous engagement, a concealed identity, a 21-year lie that now spanned 3 adult lives. She read the documents twice, 3 times, then said to her partner, "This is one of the worst cases I've ever seen." She contacted Daniel first. He didn't answer. She called again. And again. On the 4th attempt, he picked up. "Mr. Cooper," she said, "I need to speak with you about the report that was filed." Daniel's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." Alvarez softened. "You've already done the hardest part. You survived. Now let us do ours." The interview. Daniel tells the story he never wanted to tell. 2 days later, Daniel sat across from Detective Alvarez in a quiet, softly lit interview room. Not an interrogation space, but a survivor's room. A place designed to feel safe. He told her everything. Not in a clean narrative. Not in a linear order. But in fragment after fragment of memory. The tutoring sessions. The compliments. The grooming. The emotional manipulation. The secret touches. The fear of losing her approval. The confusion about what was happening. The way she had convinced him he was mature enough. The way she had framed it as special. The moment she disappeared. The crushing, lifelong shame. He broke down halfway through. Detective Alvarez slid a box of tissues across the table. When he finished, she said the sentence most survivors rarely hear. "You were a child, Daniel. And none of this was your fault." Daniel cried again, softer, but with a sort of relief he hadn't felt before. A release that comes only from finally being believed. Jada's interview. A daughter torn between love and horror. Jada met with a different investigator 2 days later. She arrived trembling, exhausted, emotionally destroyed. The detective's first question was gentle. "Jada, what are you most afraid of right now?" She didn't hesitate. "That I'll never know who I am." The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then she explained what it was like to learn her mother had sexually abused a child. What it was like to learn that child was her father. What it was like to suddenly see her future collapse in one night. What it was like to feel contaminated by something she had no part in creating. She said, "I feel like a crime scene." The detective shut off her recorder for a moment. "You are not what she did," he told her. "You are not responsible for where you came from. You are not broken." Jada didn't know how to believe him. But hearing the words helped. Even a little. Jada and Daniel have taken the bravest step of their lives. They've broken the silence. But for Teresa Reynolds, the nightmare she created is about to shift from a family tragedy to a criminal reckoning. The files are open. The detectives are circling. And the woman who thought she could outrun her past is about to learn that justice has a very long memory. The investigation is just beginning, and the consequences will be far more severe than anyone in that house could have imagined. To see how the law pursues a 20-year-old crime, and what happens when the handcuffs finally come out, watch out for Part 2.